grazie a Luca, grazie a tutti di essere qui in questo momento clou dell'11ª edizione del Festival Mimesis. Quindi io, con la solennità che non mi compete, leggerò le motivazioni del premio Udine Filosofia 2024 per l'opera Disconoscimento di Alenka Zupančič, che qui, fra l'altro, presentiamo in traduzione italiana in anteprima assoluta. Allora, il concetto di disconoscimento, che l'autrice mutua dalla psicanalisi, descrive efficacemente l'atteggiamento con cui la nostra società oggi affronta eventi traumatici e disturbanti, come il cambiamento climatico, conflitti in Europa e in Medio Oriente, le profonde trasformazioni del tessuto sociale che sono comportate e causate dall'avvento e dall'impatto delle nuove tecnologie. A differenza della semplice negazione, che fa finta di non vedere quello che accade, il disconoscimento si caratterizza proprio per il riconoscimento pieno di ciò che rifiuta, cioè riconosce ciò che poi alla fine rifiuta. Zupančič dimostra come l'atto stesso di affermare, di essere consapevoli dell'esistenza di certe realtà spiacevoli, i rischi ambientali, la crisi economica, la crisi economica globale e così via, diventi spesso un feticcio che svuota tale consapevolezza di ogni reale drammaticità. Disconoscimento, il titolo del libro, dunque arricchisce il pensiero critico contemporaneo introducendo un concetto fondamentale capace di offrire una prospettiva originale e fruttuosa per comprendere il presente e le sue sfide. La commissione del premio Udine Filosofia 2024 ha dunque deciso di assegnare il riconoscimento per il testo più significativo dell'anno all'opera Disconoscimento di Alenka Zupančič, la cui appunto traduzione italiana, come ricordavo, viene presentata qui in anteprima. Grazie. Il premio, tra l'altro, è un'opera dell'artista Giuliano Gilberti, che ha ospitato, tra l'altro, poco fa un evento del festival e che è stato appositamente creato per Alenka.
La parola alla professoressa Giordano per una breve presentazione del pensiero della professoressa Zupančič. Prego, Sergio, e grazie per il tuo contributo.
Grazie a voi, perché è davvero un piacere, un grande onore, e queste non sono parole di circostanza, poter presentare qui questa sera, dire qualche parola appunto su un lavoro che è un lavoro decennale, importante, significativo, che giustamente il Festival Mimesis ha voluto riconoscere con questo premio. Il libro che appunto è stato premiato è un libro importante, significativo, critico, provocatorio, ma viene da una lunga serie di studi e di riflessioni che hanno visto da sempre la professoressa Zupančič intrecciare filosofia da una parte, i nomi canonici della filosofia occidentale, Nietzsche, Kant, Hegel, e dall'altra parte una visione della psicoanalisi che non è assolutamente strumentale, ma vuole in ogni modo presentarsi come una critica, come un cuneo che si infila appunto nella tradizione filosofica e porta a nuove aperture. Dico cose che forse sono note alla maggior parte dei presenti e delle presenti, ma voglio ricordare appunto che si attribuisce appunto il lavoro della professoressa Zupančič alla cosiddetta scuola psicoanalitica di Lubiana, accanto ai nomi ancora insomma, noti e conosciuti di Mladen Dolar e soprattutto Slavoj Žižek, con cui ha in comune questa articolazione e questo intreccio importante. E tuttavia, soprattutto questo libro lo dimostra, il lavoro di Alenka Zupančič ha sempre cercato nuove piste di indagine, nuove possibilità di aperture. Ne stavamo parlando anche prima, il suo lavoro più recente mi diceva si concentra sulla nozione di finestra e di cornice come ciò che può, da un certo punto di vista, limitare lo sguardo, ma anche appunto aprire diverse prospettive. Come dicevo appunto Nietzsche, Kant, ma anche per esempio tra i filosofi contemporanei Badiou, che è stato il relatore di una delle sue tesi di dottorato. Che cosa porta la psicoanalisi in tutto questo, in questo intreccio con la filosofia? È di fatto un punto di partenza per ulteriori problematizzazioni. È quel campo, come dice Zupančič in un libro che si intitola Tre interventi sulla psicoanalisi, che non resta mai nel proprio campo. La psicoanalisi è quello che in qualche modo si chiede continuamente dove stare, quali sono i propri limiti e forza in questo modo anche i limiti di tutte le discipline con cui si contaminano. Questo forse è il motivo che mi ha portato ad interessarmi del suo pensiero e del suo lavoro, io che filosofa non sono, ma che sono sempre alla ricerca di punti di vista problematici, critici e che articolino ecletticamente anche diverse possibilità di prospettive. E nella psicoanalisi, come probabilmente saprete, il versante lacaniano, come è già stato anche detto, è quello che consente maggiormente questo tipo di problematizzazione ed è quello che ha consentito appunto a Zupančič di aprire degli sguardi davvero inediti, come dicevo prima, provocatori ed estremamente critici e utili a indagare diversi oggetti, artefatti e creazioni estetiche che oscillano vanno dalla nozione di reale che Zupančič ha esaminato nell'intreccio proprio tra Kant e Lacan, per quanto riguarda soprattutto la dimensione etica, quella dell'etica kantiana tradizionale, che poi appunto si è sviluppato nell'analisi di come l'uno si scinde, vive una sorta di schisi secondo la nozione nicciana, che poi appunto può essere riletta attraverso Lacan, e che l'ha fatta poi arrivare appunto ad indagare per esempio la nozione di comico, di nuovo come elemento dirompente, assolutamente non conciliante, come qualcosa che di nuovo ci mette in contatto con questo reale che mi pare sia un nodo che continua a ricomparire in vario modo. E anche e soprattutto, e devo dire che questo è il libro che mi ha interessato più da vicino, è quello sulla sessualità, il tema della sessualità non come uno dei tanti aspetti della soggettività, forse sopravvalutato in certe linee della psicoanalisi, ma la sessualità proprio come forma di incoerenza ontologica, non come atto sessuale, ma di nuovo come possibilità di articolare una dimensione non ancora evidenziata, non ancora evidente. In tutto questo, appunto, la nozione di disconoscimento arriva a sancire questo percorso. Il libro è una sorta di progressione che ragiona attraverso quella che è un'altra caratteristica del lavoro di Zupančič, casi molto concreti come quelli che sono stati evidenziati, la crisi climatica, le guerre che ci circondano, il senso di una catastrofe imminente eppure sempre messa da parte attraverso la formula del sì lo so, ma comunque. Anzi, secondo quell'aneddoto che viene raccontato all'inizio del libro, che viene ripreso da Freud, del marito che dice alla moglie: se uno di noi due muore, io mi trasferisco a Parigi. E da qui appunto ripartiremo. Volevo per concludere raccontare un altro aneddoto che riguarda altre teoriche con cui mi è capitato di lavorare, che mi è capitato di tradurre, le quali discorrendo tra loro, si trattava di Gayatri Spivak e Judith Butler, stavano parlando della psicoanalisi e Spivak pare dicesse: io non so niente di psicoanalisi, e pare che Judith Butler le abbia risposto: ma la psicoanalisi sa tutto di te. Ecco, questo libro ci fa vedere benissimo, attraverso il ragionamento e l'argomentazione di Alenka Zupančič, come la psicanalisi davvero sa tutto di noi. Ma ci vuole l'acume, l'intelligenza, la capacità critica e anche la creatività teorica di una filosofa come Alenka Zupančič perché possiamo rendercene conto. Grazie. Volevo solo per concludere ringraziare anche Sara Nocent che ha co-tradotto il libro insieme con me. Grazie mille.
Yeah, first, thank you very much, Sergio, for this really, really generous introduction. As much as I could follow it, I do understand a little bit of Italian, but I'm really sorry that I don't speak it. So my talk will be in English. I would, of course, also like not only to thank the committee who awarded me this philosophy award this year, which is a rare thing. I don't think there are many philosophy awards around. Also, I would like to obviously express my humble, really, I mean, I'm quite honored and to receive this award, and I'm in a very good company. Microphone, it doesn't work? Huh. Now it works. Okay, I have to eat it almost. So I'm really grateful, and I would like also to thank, obviously, to be given the opportunity to present a little bit what this book is all about here this evening. Then just also, I would like to thank Sara Nocent, who was actually my first contact in Ljubljana and was also involved with the translation of the book with this project. And before I deliver this talk, which will be roughly 30 minutes long, I would like to also thank Giacomo Klein for the effort of translating it simultaneously in Italian, which will hopefully help give it a flow that would be nice. Okay, so let me just tell you what I prepared for this evening. So we could say that we live in strange times, difficult times. Of course, this may depend on which part of the world you live in or what social class you belong to. But even if you are not living in a war zone, being bombed daily or forced out of homes by floods or fires, or struggling to survive day by day, there still is this pervasive sense that the world has gone amiss. We feel as though we are losing our fundamental points of orientation very often, and that changes are taking place that we don't even begin to understand. And this is interesting because for a long time we have lived in what was perceived by progressive left politics, philosophy, critical theory, as a desire for change, a necessity of change. This meant a push for social and economic transformation. However, this imperative was continually met with the frustrating impossibility of enacting any real change because the existing economic order was able to absorb and even the most radical and subversive ideas and emerging even stronger in the process. In other words, we seemed to be living under the spell of what Francis Fukuyama famously called the end of history, roughly understood as the inevitable triumph of capitalist liberal democracy. So the idea was that this system was free from the fundamental internal contradictions characteristic of other social orders. So although there was still room for improvement and expansion, there was no room for a fundamental paradigmatical shift or change. But then at some point, this perception got drastically shattered as internal contradictions of capitalist liberal democracy began to surface really. For instance, the financial crisis of 2007-2008 was a clear economic marker of this shift. Whereas I think the most powerful symbolic marker of this end of Fukuyama's end of history was probably the election of Donald Trump in 2016 in the US. As many remarked, the impossible happened. And it seems we are now witnessing a paradoxical reactivation of history, the end of its end, moving at an accelerated pace, albeit toward some kind of catastrophe. This catastrophe takes on many forms: political, moral, economic, and of course ecological, all of which increasingly appear interconnected. So we now found ourselves in a reverse situation. A major tectonic shift is already happening, whether we like it or not. It didn't wait for us to decide that now we were really ready to put an end to whatever status quo was there before. The world as we know it truly is falling apart, changing dramatically all around us, right before our eyes. This is certainly not, probably not, the kind of change we envisioned when we demanded change, but it is real and ongoing. It is penetrating and shaking up all spheres of our lives. And many even talk about the end of capitalism as we knew it, not that it's end, but that capitalism itself is dramatically changing, like mechanism work, or, there's this talk about the replacement of capitalism with so-called techno-feudalism or neo-feudalism. George Udine has this argument, and Yanis Varoufakis as well. So, in other words, the talk about the need for change has largely become meaningless. And I guess it is no surprise that it has been co-opted precisely by those in power, particularly financial power, where it now essentially means adapting to the new reality. More precisely, it means adapting to change rather than being its agent or in any meaningful sense. And we don't seem to know exactly where this is heading. So the general feeling or state surrounding these tectonic shifts is, to borrow a term from Alain Badiou, one of profound disorientation. Part of this disorientation involves, I claim, disavowal. Disavowal of the disorientation itself, as well as disavowal of the change in its radical paradigm shifting nature. And of course, this brings me to the title of my book. On the one hand, the book addresses the following question. How is it possible that despite having knowledge of, let's say, these catastrophic threats to our existence, nothing fundamentally changes in our basic attitude, which remains mostly business as usual? In Freudian psychoanalysis, this structure is known as disavowal, or Verleugnung is the German term, which differs in interesting ways from denial or negation. So disavowal, for example, in disavowal, we don't really deny climate change. On the contrary, we openly acknowledge that we are fully aware of its existence. We organize all kinds of conferences and summits and so on. Yet we continue to live and to produce and to think exactly as we did before. Octave Manouni, a French psychoanalyst, proposed the following really great, concise formula of disavowal. I know very well, but nevertheless, I carry on as though I didn't know. In my practical behavior, belief persisted as if I didn't know this. So this paradoxical structure actually allows knowledge, the very declaration that we fully understand the reality of the situation, to distance us from the consequences of that same knowledge. Well, it's a paradoxical structure. And as we shall see later on, one must also consider that contemporary forms of disavowal not only work in spite of knowledge, of our knowledge, but precisely with its help, through the very act of declaring that we know all about it. So, as I said, the notion of disavowal is particularly interesting because it is different from denial or negation, which, according to Freudian theory, is based on repression in the sense of verdrängen. So what, in fact, to put it very shortly, is the difference between repression and disavowal? Actually, we could formulate it in simple kind of topological terms. Repression effectively implies two dimensions or two levels. Let's say our reality and another level where what is pushed out, repressed from our reality, persists and then sometimes returns. But what is repressed no longer constitutes part of our reality. Disavowal, on the other hand, is one-dimensional, in the sense that what is disavowed does not disappear from our reality. It is still there, on the same level, part of our reality. So everything is out in the open. We know it well, we say it, and so on. So disavowal doesn't make something disappear. Rather, its changes affect the nature and meaning of this something. We could say that it derealizes it. It affects its character of the real, as real. That is, as an extraordinary, surprising, shattering bit of reality, which is basically the Lacanian notion of the real, which is not the same as reality. When you perceive or learn about something and disavow it, it is because, of course, this something has the capacity to change reality for you. It is not just any stupid thing from this reality. And of course, the same could be said for repression. But whereas repression preserves the extraordinary character of that thing by pushing it out of our ordinary reality, disavowal keeps it as part of reality, yet changes its character. We could thus say that disavowal consists in making what is for me and perhaps for others as well, an extraordinary, game-changing fact, simply an ordinary fact, but still a fact. So what is disavowed is its shattering or game-changing dimension and not simply its fact or its occurring. And perhaps it is this that we like to refer to as a post-factual world. You know, we talk a lot about post-factual world. Not that there are no more facts. On the contrary, there are only facts around. Yet they are just facts and no longer carry any weight of the real or of truth. And I think it is worth emphasizing here that the status quo maintained in this way does not mean simply that everything stays the same, but also that even the most drastic changes, for the worse, for instance, do not really get to us. So adapting efficiently to the new reality can be part of status quo. And so can be numerous forms of catastrophism and fascination with the apocalypse, with various disasters and predictions of doom, with the spectacle of it. Far from being the opposite of disavowal, this kind of catastrophism is an important part of its contemporary functioning. The end of the world, for example, acts in these discourses as a kind of spectacular backdrop, a coulisse, a stage on which we can simultaneously go on with our business as usual. More often than not, these images of the apocalypse are but a phantasmatic screen that obfuscates and protects us from the actual apocalypse that is already going on and is not waiting for us somewhere in the future. In the contemporary forms of disavowal, I also detect, and this is the other arc of my argument, some shifts in relation to the classical concept of disavowal. Unlike the question raised by the classical disavowal, the enigma is no longer simply why do knowledge and revelations such as famous "the emperor is naked," why don't they work so that we continue to believe and behave as we did, as if we didn't know? The question now is, I claim rather, how this kind of knowledge and these kinds of revelations themselves actively help to maintain the very illusion that they're supposedly undermining. So this suggests that a permutation occurs at the level of this, but nevertheless, the second part of Manuni's formula, which originally presupposes a certain opposition or contradiction. So that the structure, I know very well, but nevertheless, in spite of it, I continue to believe the opposite, mutates into something like, I know very well, I declare it, and that is precisely why I can keep my belief and enjoy it undisturbed. Or I see it, I acknowledge it, and this is why I can now forget about it. I know, a trivial example. Despite already taking medication for high blood pressure, my blood pressure is still too high. I keep postponing my visit to the doctor and doing something about it. At the same time, I never miss an opportunity to tell my friends and acquaintances about the problem. So it is as if the repeated acknowledgement, the declaration of my awareness that I have an issue and should see my doctor actively helps me avoid doing anything about it. So disavowal, therefore, only truly works with the help of knowledge and acknowledgement. It's not simply the opposite of knowledge. And I further claim that beyond our individual idiosyncrasies, the concept of disavowal describes kind of our general predominant, even social state of mind, more accurately than, say, denial, which is the term we otherwise prefer to use to describe our non-confrontation with certain traumatic aspects of reality. Denial also exists, of course, and we mostly associate it with, let's say, conspiracy theories. Perverse disavowal is far less extravagant. It is more reasonable. It claims to be well aware of the problem, and it is indistinguishably fused with what we like to call the liberal mainstream. And indeed, I think, politically speaking, we seem to be caught in a macabre dance in which denial, often associated with populism, on the one hand, and perverse disavowal associated with the business as usual mainstream, on the other hand, constitute the only two principal and competing political options, each fueling the other with their own pathologies, responding mostly to each other rather than to any social reality. I therefore want to emphasize that the point of the book is not merely to provide a critical analysis or exposure of how, as individuals, we cope with these difficulties, overwhelming events, and so on. Rather, the primary focus is on the social dimension of disavowal. In other words, the emphasis is on disavowal as something kind of handed to us as a ready-made solution, as a ready-made token. Disavowal, this is socially encouraged, sustained, and perpetuated. I also detect a growing complicity at the social level between the structures of denial and disavowal. And I would like to dedicate the rest of my talk to this, which will also allow us to kind of take up things a little bit more concretely. The point here is that, so this complicity between denial and disavowal, it has also its kind of social functioning, and I think, as you all know, I guess, something that became particularly salient during the COVID pandemics, but which existed before and certainly continues, is this growing mistrust in science. But my question is, how do we understand this? Is it really simply that people are regressing en masse to some irrationality and pre-enlightenment modes of thinking? Or is there a certain rationale, albeit a displaced one, in this mistrust of science? So let me look a little bit closer on what is going on in these debates. As you know, the authority of modern science is based, in Karl Popper's terms, on the inherent possibility of falsification. That is, on the falsifiability of all its theories. If a claim or theory cannot be falsified, it is not, if it is not inherently testable, it is not scientific. The credibility of modern science, thus, is based on a very different principles than authority, where you have this logic, it is so because a figure of authority says that it is so. But it is also indisputable that in its social functioning, science has achieved at some point the status of authority, very much like the classical authority. Which is to say that although most of us have no means of verifying or falsifying scientific discoveries and theories, we take them to be true or blindly believe in them because they are socially recognized and labeled as scientific. So to accept something as true because science says it is so is different from the way in which science itself works, which is by relying on the principle of doubt and falsification rather than that of any outside authority. And obviously this difference is often blurred in contemporary social media debates, in which refusal to accept the social authority of science, refusal to trust science, is justified by invoking the scientific method, the principle of falsification. So we hear things such as, we refuse to blindly believe, trust the social authority of science, and pledge our right to exercise doubt, which is precisely the most scientific thing to do. Is science not supposed to be all about doubt and not taking anything at its face value? So we are indeed the true embodiment of the scientific spirit, contrary to the often corrupted scientists who just blindly repeat what power, politics, or capital wants them to say. So this is one of the arguments. So in this way, as you can see, science becomes justification for not trusting science. And this is a very typical confusion of the social authority of science and its scientific method and authority. The two are not the same. So while scientific method is based on doubt, possible falsification, and constant interrogation, the social authority of science is a different matter. It is much more akin to traditional authority in the sense of something that hinges on our belief and trust. Now, of course, again, you can say that part of this trust comes from our knowledge about how science operates, about its method being precisely other than that of relying on any outside authority. So we trust science because it doesn't trust anything. But this doesn't make our belief, trust in science any less about trust and belief. So I think the recent collapsing of the social authority of science does not be attributed simply to a rise of obscurantist beliefs, since the social authority itself is based on something like an obscurantist belief. We trust science because it is science. And of course, this gap cannot be directly filled in by any positive knowledge, and thus requires a leap of faith. And it seems to be irreducible, indispensable for our social and symbolic function. Society, and indeed science itself as part of society, cannot function as a purely scientific community. And so related to this, what we call social collapse, or collapse of the social authority of science, allow me now just to make two further remarks with which I will also then conclude. So first, it would be erroneous to see in this collapse, again, a sort of regression into some pre-modern, pre-scientific mode of knowledge and belief. For the collapse concerns primarily the always contemporary existence of this gap that necessitates blind belief or trust in scientific claims. Simply put, more and more people refuse to make the leap of faith when it comes to science. So it is faith or trust rather than knowledge that is in jeopardy here. So a crumbling of the social authority of science, a reluctance or straight out refusal to trust it, is the cause of then undermining or relativizing its inherently scientific claims and scientific authority, and not the other way around. Second, and I guess more importantly, if we just listen to what these skeptics are saying, how they formulate the reasons for their mistrust, two keywords keep re-emerging, and they are money, profit, capital, financial interests, and surveillance. So if we listen to what the skeptics are saying, two words keep re-emerging, and they are money, profit, capital, financial interest, and surveillance, monitoring and directing our lives for, again, monetary or disciplinary purposes. Now, if we briefly put in parentheses the often extremely picturesque and phantasmatic ways in which these two words, money and surveillance, orchestrate the narratives of different conspiracy theories, it is only fair to say that what they evoke is not just a product of imagination, but part and parcel of our social order. That is to say, and to put it as simply as possible, that science is losing its social authority on account precisely of its being an inherent and important part of the late capitalist world order and its dynamics. And increasingly so, since, for example, very often money for research now comes not from the state as representing public interest, but rather from private corporations pursuing private interests, we could subsume. So yeah, the answer is kind of boring and predictable, capitalism, bow. But in a way, it is true that it is precisely this capitalist financial dynamics, also in its new forms, that fuels this mistrust in science, its disappearance as social authority. But this causality is not without an interesting twist. To take just one concrete example of how involvement in capitalist dynamics facilitates the denial of scientifically established facts. It is obviously true that the so-called green transition can bring huge profits to certain corporations, which in turn can actively direct and influence what is socially perceived as green. A very passionate debate, which includes scientists, has been taking place lately. For example, is a debate between advocates of renewable energy and advocates of nuclear energy. So renewable energy advocates asserts that only solar, wind, and hydropower count as green energy. The green is the keyword here. But some nuclear energy advocates counter that with when the full impact of construction, of operation, and land usage is taken into account, these renewables cause greater environmental harm than the nuclear, so the latter should be regarded as green energy, as really green. So in whose interest is it to promote solely renewable energy, even if the environment impact is big, and in whose interest it is to promote nuclear energy as the truly green alternative? We have all these debates, you're probably familiar with them. So there is clearly money and power on both sides, in both options, because this cannot be even thought about without some serious financial support. I was just talking about how there are these discussions, and clearly you can say that there is money and power on both sides, that somebody will profit. And in a way, there is no way out of this suspicion within the existing order, how things are done. So, which is why this no way out, this often results in the conclusion that, okay, but there is no climate change, since it is all just about financial interest. And I think we should recognize this claim for what it is. Not simply an obscurantist regression, but a precisely, I would say, disavowal of the traumatic reality of capitalism itself. Financial interests, which are obviously part of capitalism, are acknowledged and used in a way that kind of shields capitalism's very brutal reality, and the suspicion moves to science. The acknowledgement of the interest of the capital, dirty interests of capital, helps to maintain the latter intact and focuses on another target. So the consequence, the conclusion, becomes the non-existence, for instance, of climate change. So this kind of perverse syllogism goes as follows. Everything in our social life is about money and financial interest. Therefore, there is no climate change. And something similar, you will probably notice, happened in the case of COVID. So more often than not, a refusal to accept scientific facts, their denial, is just one of the forms taken by the disavowal of the truly traumatic dimension also of capitalism. The traumatism at stake is not only about social disintegration and environmental disaster related to capitalism, but at least as much about what appears as a nightmarish no way out of it. Our powerlessness to do anything about it. You know, nightmare is not simply having horrible dreams. It is the impossibility to wake up. It is the impossibility to come out of it. So this nightmarish powerlessness is really, it does not simply point to our passivity or lack of genuine will. This is a true problem. And I think this disavowal of this then moves to this denial, negation of whatever, climate change or something else. Now, and in this precise sense, I will now come to my conclusion. The denial of climate change is a kind of denunciation of capitalism by proxy, which could be another possible definition of disavowal. Not a direct denial, but a denial by proxy. And pointing out, let's say, financial interests and people who profit from different things here is a means of this disavowal. because it kind of redirects also our attention to the subjective reasons like greed, enjoyment, and diverts us from the far more traumatic possibility of greedy and self-enjoying a subjective, non-subjective system of which no one is really or fully in control. So a very interesting link between denial and disavowal appears here. Denial of climate change is, in this sense, a result of the disavowal of the brutal reality of capitalism. And so is, I think, the denial of or refusal to accept many other scientific facts. Okay, this was just a very brief attempt to point out some things that I discuss in the book. Obviously, I don't have a solution or a magic cure for this state, social state. However, I do believe that a better understanding of these phenomena, precisely there where they are a bit counterintuitive, understanding of how they often cut across the divides we typically work with, like knowledge against belief, active against passive, progressive against regressive, that this kind of taking understanding can at least help us orient ourselves a bit better when it comes to identifying perhaps the targets and the aims of our social and ideological struggles. Okay, thank you very much for this question.